Do you ever have a great pairing like berries and goat cheese?
Or persimmon in a mango milkshake?
And it just makes each part taste different, maybe even better than they would on their own? This is Juxtapose, the podcast where we bring you two tasty pieces of art to see what they're like together.
I'm your host, Bea Forkin.
And I'm Sarah Peacher. Let's dig in.
Okay, so what's up, everyone? We're back with video this season. So welcome to episode 1, season 2. I'm bringing to the table this lovely collection of short stories by Emma Cline. It's called Daddy. So a little bit of information about Emma Cline. So she's a novelist and an award-winning short story writer. She first came to fame by winning the prestigious Plimpton Prize by the Paris Review with her short story Marion, which actually is in this collection. But then she became like the buzzy writer of that year. I think it was 2016, because there was like this huge bidding war for her novel, The Girls. The story goes that there was like a bidding war for like $2 million for this book, which is like crazy. So she just had so much allure about her, a lot of mystery. The whole industry was kind of consumed with her because of her beauty, her youth, and then also her wealth. Like she was like one of 6 children, like grew up in California, a very comfortable upbringing. So I was also drawn to her and her mystery. I've actually never read any of her novels, but I did follow that bidding war story. But it was her short stories that really introduced me to her writing. So I was pumped when Daddy came out. This was published in 2020. It's a collection of 10 different short stories. 7 of the stories were published in those premier lit journals like The New Yorker, Paris Review. Like, she's as big as you can get in literary fiction. In the New York Times Review, Brandon Taylor, he wrote that Cline's idiom is earnestness punctuated by millennial cool, but nothing too fussy, everything in just the right place. He continues that there's a riffing playfulness to her prose as it turns back on itself to interrupt, comment, or elaborate. This self-aware tone appears here or there in the collection, cluing us in that the author, or at least the narrating intelligence, knows something these characters do not, covering the stories in a patina of wisdom or insight. And finally, he concludes his observation. One of the great themes of Daddy is artifice, performance. That some of the stories are set in Hollywood and literary worlds is not surprising. So some of the stories in the collection seem to overlap more than others in terms of themes. But one theme I noticed between the stories is that the main characters seem to have some kind of narcissistic personality disorder, or like an inability to recognize within themselves their role in the scenarios that they're in, or their like own faulty behaviors. Of the collection, the Wall Street Journal also provided some criticism by describing the unifying theme as, quote, a blur between victim and predator. And I think that fits too. So a story from the collection that comes to mind is one that I want to discuss today, and it's called Nanny. A quick summary of this story. The story is about a 24-year-old protagonist. She is a nanny. She goes by the name of Kayla, and the story opens with her having like fled or actively fleeing a swarm of paparazzi after a story leaks to the media that she was having an affair with a famous married actor, Rafe. I don't know if that's how you pronounce his name. It's Rafe. She was hired to work as a nanny for this couple, and they have a young child. His name is Henry, and Rafe is like filming a movie in some like other location, and she was hired to like go along on this movie shoot. So rather than returning home, Kayla hides out with her mother's college friend, Mary, and Mary's partner, Dennis. So Kayla's portrayed is consumed with her own vanity. The story opens with her like searching out her own name on Google to see if there's any new images or stories appear. She screenshots images as they come up. She saves them to her phone so that she can like zoom in on them later. She has boundary issues. She like goes through Mary's son's drawers and like reads through all of his stuff. She takes Mary's car to go shopping, and she really doesn't feel any remorse over what she's done. And there's like even a line in the story where she feels like something like this would happen to her. Like she kind of assumes a very passive role in the situation that she's in. So the story escalates when Mary and Dennis, they invite Kayla to go to this party, and she goes with them. No one's paying attention to her, and she like wanders off and ends up connecting with a young girl. She's like a second grader. Kayla doesn't know her name. She's like, oh, it's Sophie or Sophia. And the two of them like play Barbies when Kayla ends up falling asleep in the little girl's room. Dennis then like jolts her awake and has this confrontation with her that she's like more than this terrible moment and demands almost a redemptive arc or an apologetic Kayla to emerge. And like she doesn't. The story ends with her pushing back like, I'm not a good person. And the two of them wait as Mary like pulls the car around, and then she like sucks in her stomach because there might be a paparazzi hiding out and she has to look good for this image. So I discovered, again, like Cline is a story writer. I read the story that won the Plimpton Prize. It's called Marion. And I really fell in love with her prose and her storytelling. I wanted to focus on the story Nanny because I feel like it really captures like how eager our society is to like punish like a bad girl. And there's this demand on young women to apologize for their sexuality, and for the men who indulge it are never like held accountable. There's a lot to admire about this story, like just the writing, the prose is really beautiful. The structure is like very clean storytelling. So that's Nanny.
So today I'm bringing to the table The Hunger Games, though I primarily want to focus in on its recent comeback in 2023. We are going to get into a little bit of my like history with it too, but also the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes came out recently. It's having a moment again. So my personal history with The Hunger Games, I like grew up with it. I was its target audience at the time that it was coming out. I read the books in, I think, like late middle school, early high school. And then later, you know, as the movies were coming out, I would see each one. I'm not sure that I saw any in the theaters, but watching them later is something that I definitely did. A little bit of synopsis for those who may not have seen or read The Hunger Games. The main trilogy and the movies centered around the character Katniss Everdeen, and she lives in this dystopian nation that's segmented into 11 districts. She lives in the poorest district that's the furthest away from the capital, and she's forced to become what they call a tribute for her district in the Hunger Games, which is this gladiator-esque competition, except it's performed with children. And there's more technology involved because this is like in a near future. Katniss rises to a sort of fame over the course of the story. She's loved by the masses and ends up being hated by the dictator, President Snell. And she competes in multiple games while trying to aid a group of rebels in overthrowing Snell. So that's generally what the original trilogy was about. A little bit about Suzanne Collins, the author of this series. Her early career was comprised of writing for kids' TV, actually, which is something that I didn't know before and is really interesting.
That's wrote cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah. She wrote for Nickelodeon and PBS. I was definitely a PBS kid, so I probably watched Suzanne Collins' work and didn't even know it at the time. She wrote a series of children's books as well before the Hunger Games trilogy, which was published between 2008 and 2010. And then the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes came out in 2020, which, is a very interesting time period for that to arise, another dystopian moment in the midst of pandemic. In an interview with the New York Times, Collins discussed the various influences for the series. The war on Iraq and just war theory, the Greek myth of Theseus and Mary Renault's The King Must Die, as well as Spartacus. She also explained that the characters Peta and Gale, who become part of a love triangle with Katniss, are offering different perspectives on the just war debate. And she said, quote, Katniss isn't just deciding on a partner, she's figuring out her worldview, end quote. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the new movie as well. People may not have seen this yet, but may have enjoyed, the Hunger Games series as a teen or tween. So the new movie is a prequel to the trilogy and focuses in on President Snow, whose first name is Coriolanus. Very interesting name, but the story focuses in on his life before he was president. So he's pretty young. He's still in school at the time of this story. The Hunger Games were also in their early days. I think only maybe like 10 years of them had happened so far by the start of the movie. And Snow is one of the first mentors to tributes, which, it's this role where people are helping their tributes before they enter the arena so that they potentially can win. And he forges a bond with the tribute Lucy Gray, who's a folk musician from the same district as Katniss. So there's a very interesting, thread that's woven in this prequel. Many of his initial efforts show positive intentions with positive results, but over the course of the movie, it becomes increasingly clear that perhaps Snow's inherited nature, his continual wrong choices in addition to that, perhaps a combination of both of those, in fact, unlock his potential for becoming a despicably evil man. As for this part of the story, Collins said in an interview with Scholastic that she wanted to explore the piece of just war theory pertaining to the state of nature, which is a theory posed by John Locke that the natural state is one of equality in which no one person has power over another and all are free to do as they please. She also dips into Locke's tabula rasa theory, writing how Snow's childhood and adolescence set him up to be the dictator of the later trilogy, the Hunger Games trilogy. The state of nature theory comes into question with how every other character around Snow deals with their deeply traumatic childhoods, but they don't become power hungry and evil the way that he does.
So we are going to switch gears a little bit and go into our conversation of how these two pieces come together. So the first question that I have for you is, I'm curious about your personal connection to Hunger Games. I know you talked about it a little bit in your introduction of this, but what drew you to the series as a younger person, and then what draws you back to it as an adult?
Great question. Thank you so much for that question. As a young person, it was definitely like a confluence of factors that really brought me to Hunger Games. So part of it was just that it was wildly popular. Like the book was everywhere. Everyone was reading it. But, looking back too, I was thinking more about like, why was that book so popular, or why was that series so popular when I was a tween/teen? It, I think, relates a lot to what was going on culturally at the time and like what we had come through leading up to the release of this series. So dystopian literature had a big resurgence at the time in general. Some people were saying because of our like post 9/11 collective consciousness around that. Some of it, I think, too, is probably attributed to the 2008 financial crisis. And it makes sense that these stories were popular among kids who were living through those times where their parents were navigating traumatic things that were outside of their control, and the kids are looking at their parents trying to handle that, as well as like seeing things on the news and all of that. And I think also, in addition to that, gun violence in schools and having to do drills to prepare for things like that. Basically, the genre was really capitalizing on the what if things go as wrong as people are warning us that they might as kids. And that's what me and a lot of the kids around me were feeling and probably still feel even to this day. I think that's why bringing back this series with a story that draws connections even closer to the rise of like fascism, those same kids who read those dystopian stories back then, me among them, might feel a bit of catharsis, revisiting them. There's the nostalgia there as well. But I was also curious, like, considering that you're older than me, how did you feel reading The Hunger Games and how do you relate to it?
Okay, so I was young when the books came out, but I was in like young adulthood. So I was, I think, working in a library by then. So I had some distance from the books. Like I was never the target audience for them, but I remember the movies and I remember going to them. And so I kind of felt I was drawn to them just because they were everywhere, like you said. I have trouble in general, like really connecting with dystopian literature. I think because it's like it's so hyper real that in some ways that it's like this is horrifying. Like I like have a horrifying experience like reading it. So and now I'm back in a library again, and we were talking about this before we started recording that there's never been a series since The Hunger Games that has that same level of like buzz. The kids are like still seeking it out. And I really liked what you brought up about when a society is like going through like a trauma, that it would make sense that these kinds of dystopian books would have an appeal. So they're
Yeah.
really popular again.
Yeah. Yeah. I think also my personal connection with the books, like, even though I picked them up because like they were popular, that kind of thing, and they were coming at the right time for me, I also like had an interesting connection to Katniss in some ways, but I also felt like I could never do what she was forced to do in those times. I admired her tenacity and like the survival instincts that she had, and I would love to have even just a little bit of those. It would be
Yes.
good. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to talk a little bit about that because that is something that actually drew me to the series was like this strong female protagonist, which like seems crazy. Every time there's like a strong female protagonist, it feels crazy to be like, oh my God, we need more of that. I think I love a strong female protagonist. I feel drawn to that. So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Suzanne did a good job developing Katniss's character. And that kind of like leads into my next question too. Thank you for the segue. So I think there's a sort of connection between our two pieces about the construction and observation of celebrity. What are some of the differences or similarities between the characters of Katniss and Kayla as young women who are in close proximity or even under the spotlight of celebrity?
So at first glance, I feel like their relationship to celebrity is very different. In Nanny, Kayla is hired as a nanny for a celebrity couple. And then she ends up having this affair and then is like kind of obsessed with it being brought into the paparazzi and the spotlight. Like she really relishes in it, even though it's like really negative attention. She seems to really like it. And I feel like the story was making commentary on that really sad need for attention can drive people to behave in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And then with Katniss, her relationship to celebrity is that she has to learn how to perform in a way that's going to get her to survive. So I feel like they're different. And I guess the similarities would be that these are like, I don't know, we like learn these survival skills and some can serve us better than others.
Yeah. So I think Katniss is interesting in like thinking about the story and the way that she ascends to celebrity, even though it's a forced ascension. There's sort of like a push and pull between what she chooses and what is forced upon her as well. Because even from the very beginning at the reaping, which is the time in which tributes are picked for the Hunger Games, her sister's name is actually pulled out of the hat or the bowl, whatever you imagine. I think it's a bowl technically. Anyway, doesn't matter. Her sister's name is pulled, and people have the opportunity to volunteer as tributes, and she decides to volunteer in that moment because she cares a lot about her sister. Her sister's pretty young. She probably would not make it in the Hunger Games. So Katniss volunteers. And I find that interesting because, like, in some ways she did choose, but then there's this mandatory aspect of the Hunger Games to begin with. And that push and pull continues throughout the rest of the series, too, of she never chose to be a celebrity, but she is one. Everyone looks to her. She becomes a symbol, literally, of an entire rebellious movement. And I think that's a key difference from Kayla as well. There's a different sort of tension with Kayla of the tension leads to her recognizing that, like, this benefits me and I like that. Like, there's some of the fear of, like, oh, the paparazzi are here, but always her conclusion is, I kind of like this attention, though.
I know.
And I don't think Katniss ever has moments where she's like, I like the attention. She really, most of the time, is like, I have to perform for my survival and I don't like it. Whereas Kayla is happy to perform because it brings her attention.
But it seemed like almost like her will to survive was like contingent on the amount of attention she got, which was like very sad for Kayla as a character.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so I think that there's actually some more overlap between the two stories, at least on a craft level too. Both have a very cinematic quality to them. Both involve a female protagonist. And then there's those themes of performance present in both. How do you see these pieces speaking to one another in a general way?
I really liked that you pointed out, like, the cinematic quality to both. The way that, like, the short story takes place in LA, at least I imagined LA, but it felt like it was in some, grand house up above the city in the hills, overlooking the city, giving Hollywood, giving La La Land, that kind of thing. It definitely felt cinematic to me in that sense. And then on the other hand, the Hunger Games is like a whole completely new world, yet it's not so distant from America today. Like, it feels like a world that's only 100 years in the future or something. So with both, there's like this level of proximity to reality, but it's just distant enough that we can explore these similar themes from, like, new fictional perspectives. That was my take on some of the overlap between them. How about you?
Cool. Well, like, generally, I think, the idea of performance, the role of attention, or like being in the spotlight, and how both of them were like commentary on society, just like from different angles. I feel like the commentary in Nanny is just like how narcissistic we've all become. I really appreciated how Cline showed Kayla, like, Google searching out her own name, finding images, screenshotting it to like zoom in on it later. Because it's like, it shows a lot about her character where we can like judge it, but at the same time we can see ourselves in that too. I feel like, I don't know if narcissism is like present in Hunger Games, but like this like hungry desire for us to watch and consume, I think. I guess that's actually present in both because the media, the role of media was prevalent in both. And I mean, literally the title is like Hunger Games. And I feel like just like the hunger of that, of consumption, of consuming narratives, of like consuming people, like that is present in both. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to point out too, like the destructive quality
yeah.
present in both of, in some ways, it tends to be almost like a self-destructive quality. Like Katniss obviously doesn't have as much choice or say in what happens to her, but there are moments where she pushes towards self-destruction in order to survive, which is kind of interesting. Whereas like Kayla is a little bit self-destructive in similar ways of doing things for attention, but reaping the consequences of that too. I don't know. There's just something about like the self-destructive element of when young women are seeking attention and do like lean into the ways in which they can draw attention from the media. There's an element of this could destroy you too, though, because people are horrible.
Yeah, and they're hungry horrible. To do
they'll
it.
Put you, They'll put you in the arena, and they will stick some animals on you. So, with that in mind, this is less about the story themselves, but would you ever want to be a celebrity, and why or why not?
So, this is a funny question because I feel like as a young person, the idea of celebrity or like becoming famous was like a goal. Do you know what I mean? Like that was something like, oh, I need to have this because that's what it means to like have accomplished something. And I feel like it's a lie, that like you have to pursue this, that like it's a lie that you pursue that the truth will end up like hitting you in the end. Do you know what I mean? So like, I think when I was young, I thought that was something that I needed to do. And now like, I don't want that at all. Like, it's not something that I need. It's not something that I want. I feel doing the work that I do is like rewarding in and of itself. However, I do want to be recognized for my work, but I have zero interest in celebrity for celebrity's sake. Like that is like of no interest to me. But I want my work to like be in the world and for the work to speak for itself and, to be honored for having created something. But what about you? Would you want to be a celebrity?
I also would not want to be a celebrity. I definitely would feel very paranoid. I would not react the same way I think as Kayla does. Like in some ways I could see, like you were saying, having the benefits of, having your name out there, like making some waves sounds nice, but I would not want to do it to an extent where like millions of people know my name.
When you say that it would make you too paranoid, what do you mean by that? Like paranoid that like everything that you've done in your past life would be scrutinized and like turned into like another story, or like what?
I think more like paranoid about the future. I think of like Princess Diana the most when I think about like ultimate celebrity, just being constantly followed by people and, having to almost be locked into certain places, like have to stay at a hotel and like have security around me and then have to, like coordinate leaving places with security and all of that. I think it would just really take a toll on me mentally. So I think it would be less about like the past is the past and I can't change that. I get more anxious about the future a lot of the time. So it would come out in that way as a celebrity of like, what if someone, shows up to my book reading and like yells at me? I don't know.
Or stalking you.
Yeah, stalkers. Yeah. No, I think it would be really hard in that sense.
Okay. Would you ever want to have an affair with a celebrity?
Be out here asking the real questions.
Yes.
The hard-hitting Journalism.
Boom. Yeah, so now let's get to it. Tell me.
First of all, I would not want to have an affair with a celebrity because that would destroy my marriage, first of all. And that sounds horrible. I really like my marriage and I love my husband. Also, like the consequences of an affair in the spotlight actually comes up in both of these stories. So Katniss ends up, she's in that love triangle that I talked about, but she's really into Peeta, sort of like because she's pushed to be into him a little bit, but they're a couple in the spotlight constantly, and that's used as a tool by the media in this dystopian world to like control and manipulate them, which that's horrible. Don't like that. And then on the other hand, Kayla is in the spotlight, but then she has like no one to like back her up because like she had an affair with someone that she shouldn't have. So she's out here on her own dealing with the consequences. It sounds messy, does not sound fun. So what was maybe some of your like personal, even like your emotional response to Kayla's actions in The Nanny? You could do like a little play-by-play if you have like particular moments.
It's like an immersive read. It's told through, I think, a close third person perspective. Yeah. But it's like very much like you are in this. And so I almost like was just like along for the ride, and like I didn't have a lot of, I guess, moral judgment on what was going on. I'm just like, oh, gross, like especially that scene where she describes the first time where she has a sexual encounter with Rafe, where she describes it as like, he stuck a blunt finger in me. I'm like, oh my God, yuck. Like that was like so gross. And then as far as like the themes that were observed by the Wall Street Journal, that the stories are a commentary on like blurring the lines between like predator and victim. I felt like even though Kayla is a young person, like she's an adult, she was like 24 years old. So she is in full control over the choices that she makes. I didn't feel like, oh, wow, look at Kayla, like she's destroying this family. Like I didn't see it in that way. Like the big emotional blowback on the family wasn't observed. It was more of like this very general kind of superficial reaction to it. Like that's what we saw as a reader. Like we saw the paparazzi, we saw what the paparazzi were saying, that she wasn't as beautiful as Jessica, but we didn't actually see Jessica in the intimacy of her home as a character, like really reeling from what has all transpired. Like it was like very surfacey, Did you have an emotional response to Kayla's actions?
I think the part where I felt the most anything was her randomly going to like this child's bedroom at this party that she's at. And it was almost this like mystical moment though. There was something kind of magical realism about it because we're not entirely sure if there was even a little girl who lived there or if this is happening entirely in Kayla's imagination, and she's experiencing this moment almost like revisiting maybe a younger self in a way, or actually like being confronted with the state of vulnerability that she's in. I think especially because that scene closes with the moment of like Dennis, this guy coming in, she's woken up and she's like, I don't know what happened, and her dress is pulled up so her underwear is showing. And to me that read a little bit more like here is this moment where she's actually like confronted with like forced vulnerability almost, and like a forced moment of like she's caught off guard for real this time. But her initial reaction is that sort of like embarrassment, but then she quickly like closes that off again and is like, you know what, no, like I don't care what people think kind of thing. And I thought it was just an interesting way to handle the embarrassment, because I feel like my emotional response to being embarrassed is to like feel embarrassed for a really long time and then have that memory repeatedly come up and me feel like, ugh, like gross. Whereas
Totally.
Kayla, this character in this story, is like, you know what, whatever. I am who I am and I'm rolling with it and I've made the decisions that I've made. I'm just going to keep trucking on. And I think that's a fascinating character to read about and watch, act out her whatever actions she's going to do in this particular short story.
Yes. This particular story, I think, was featured in like the best American short stories of 2020. And in the back, there is like contributors' notes. And I think she says something about why here it is, why she wrote, or the inspiration behind the story. I'm just going to read it. A few years ago, there was a stretch of tabloid stories about celebrity affairs, often involving nannies. I was struck by a paparazzi photo of one of the young women. She looked so confident, almost smirking, but then seemed, at the same time, obviously afraid, in over her head. I wanted to explore that mindset, the bravado of youth covering up terror. The desire to try to take ownership of bad things as a way to make them less painful. Kayla is desperate to avoid being seen as a victim, to forestall pity or self-reflection by any means necessary, even if that means rebuffing actual kindness and connection. Tabloid dramas often have built-in moral code, like modern-day fairy tales. The nanny is the evil interloper, the wife is the wronged queen, the husband as a hapless and pitiable oaf. They act in their weird way as parables, tales of how we think life should go and what should happen to people who deviate. I wanted Kayla's character to resist being taught a lesson, resist the collective moral read of the situation. She might feel differently later on, but for now, Kayla's trying hard to leach this experience of meaning, even as it radically reshapes her life. I feel like that tied in with what you were saying really well.
Absolutely. Yeah, effective storytelling that I got what she explained later.
Yeah, there was I feel like the storytelling was like very crafted in a way to resist a moral observation. And I think because we'd never see what happens like intimately with the family, and it's like very like tabloid. It's very just surfacey of the blowback.
Okay, my last question is, I'm a little curious about other stories in the collection, if you want to talk about them in brief detail, but do any of them also add more facets to that, like thematic gem of blurring lines between victim and predator that you mentioned before?
Well, everyone should read the entire collection. You can consume them really quickly. I feel like Cline is a very effective story writer in pacing, prose, character development, all of it. I feel like Marianne is exploring that a little bit. The setting is on like a weed commune, but like it's told through this perspective of an 11-year-old girl who's been kind of abandoned by her mom at this like commune. Marianne makes friends with another little girl who's like older than her. So I feel like it's exploring their innocence kind of forced into this like very adult world of packing up weed. And then there's this male character there who's like shirtless. They're like nude all the time because it's this weird commune. I think this story inspired the girls, which is about the girls who were involved with Manson. And Cline like very intentionally wrote it about the girls. They were the focus. And she said like during workshop, people are like, well, I want to know about the man, like this mysterious man. And she's like, I don't want him to be the focus anymore. Like it needs to be about the girls. And so I don't know. I think that story, some really like messed up things are happening there that are like really not, maybe it is explicit to some people, but it's not like explicitly harmful, but there's some real boundary violations that are going on. I feel like that story kind of blurs the line because I feel like it's exploring blurred lines, actually, of relationships and dynamics that are like really murky.
Yeah. I feel like the victim and predator thing is really interesting in the Hunger Games too, because Katniss is forced to be a predator and forced to literally try to kill other children. Crazy. But she's also a victim because she's forced in the first place.
Yeah. I feel like Hunger Games, like, it demonstrates that in like a very literal way because it's like hunting and being hunted. So I appreciate that.
Thanks, y'all, for listening to today's episode and viewing it now that we have video as well about the Hunger Games and Emma Cline's short stories. Please check out our website at the link in the description for more information about this episode. If you have feedback or a pairing that you're dying for us to talk about, just send us a message over on our website. We'll be back again in a couple weeks with an episode about Danielle Orchard's paintings and Prada's Spring Summer 24 collection.